Good evening, everyone, or afternoon or morning, depending on when you're watching this. It's been a while since our last episode, but we are finally rejoining you. I'm Fraser Hill. I'm the party leader of the National Distributist Party, and this is the Hound podcast, the National Distributist Party's quarterly podcast at this point. We're going to try and get back to monthly, but we'll see. I'm joined today by the nominating officer. Do you want to introduce yourself? You were here last time.
Hi, my name's Sam. I was in the lot on the last podcast.
It's been so
And
long.
today we're looking, it's been a while, yeah. Today we thought we would come back together and we would talk about all things distributism, looking at the recent events in the news from a distributist perspective. We'll be focusing on the Gorton and Denton by-election that is currently being probably counted by the time this comes out.
Yeah,
The result
well,
may be out by the time you're watching.
I think it's being tallied right now, actually, since we're
Yeah.
recording this on Thursday in the evening, Thursday the 26th February, and yeah, it's meant to close today, isn't it?
Yeah, we're also going to be talking about Restore Britain and the split with Reform. We'll get more into that later, especially what a distributor's perspective is on that.
Mm-hmm.
And finally, as a curveball, I thought we would talk about nationalism across the pond in France. Did you see about the death of the activist in
Yes,
France by
Quentin.
Antifa?
I did. Yes, I did.
Yeah, well,
We'll talk
that's
about
just something
that.
else I
That'd be
thought we could
good.
talk about. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, we'll just jump straight into it, shall we? Do you want to start with Gorton and Denton because it is literally
Yeah.
contemporary? Oh,
So the
it's mental, isn't it?
So in the Gorton and Denton by-election, this has had a lot of media attention, especially online, and there is a number of candidates standing. We'll just quickly run through who there is. So there's the official Monster Raving Loony Party, which is just, for
Oh,
those who aren't familiar with British politics, it's essentially a protest party at democracy as a whole, but they are left-wing.
so you're really starting with the heaviest hitters, aren't you?
And then you've got Nick Buckley. So this is the member running for Advance UK. We will get into later the discussions between Advance UK and Restore Britain. But
Mm.
Nick Buckley himself actually stood in the, I believe it was the 2024 mayoral election for Manchester, in which he
Mm-hmm.
came third. He actually beat the Reform candidate then, I think by a couple hundred votes, but still miles behind the first two placing. I think he got about 7.5% or something like that.
Yeah, I saw 7.5 there. I also saw someone say that he got 30% in another vote. Might have been a ward election, but yeah, he's definitely met with some electoral success in his recent career.
Yeah, he's also a local man, and I believe he's also an OBE. So,
Yeah, he is.
um, but in this election, it seems that he's not really in the runnings. So, because from my understanding, it's somewhat of a three-horse race, with the major parties being Matt Goodwin from Reform UK, the Green Party with Hannah Spencer, and I'm not too sure how to pronounce this. I think it's Angeliki Stogia.
Just call her Labour lady. Just call her the
The
Iron
Labour
Lady.
Party. That so yeah, it seems to be from all polling around a 28% split between those three. My initial thinking is, isn't it crazy that nobody these days even thinks about the Conservative Party?
Yeah, the Conservatives are basically dead in the water, aren't they? They have been for months, maybe even up to a year now. But I don't know. I don't know if it's too early to call it, but I do think the two-party system of Labour and the Conservatives is dead. It all depends on two things, really. First of all, how did the Conservatives manage to claw it back between now and 2029? You know, is there any way that their kind of new cabinet, their new style of leadership and I wouldn't even know, just the way they control themselves, I suppose, is that going to
Mm.
allow them to win back voters? I doubt it, but it is possible. And second of all, are they just going to merge into Reform at some point? Because Reform has annexed so many of
Ah,
their candidates that it's just looking like a Tory 2.0.
there were reports years ago. This is when Nigel Farage was still the leader of UKIP. I believe this was heading into maybe the 2010 or was it the 2012 election.
Mm.
There was discussions going on apparently behind closed doors between Nigel Farage and some members of the Tory party. And essentially, all Nigel Farage wanted to bring his fold into the Tory party was he wanted a safe seat in the southeast, and he was happy to be an MP for the Tories as long as they started pursuing a pro UK independence agenda. So it definitely would not surprise me if we did end up seeing some kind of coalition deal or merger perhaps between Reform and the Tories. Because don't forget, we did actually see, not in the last election, but the one prior, we did actually see Reform stand down all those candidates, if we remember, for the Tories to allow, was it Boris
Mm.
Johnson to win the election?
Yeah, I remember that.
To your point about the two-party system being dead, I'm not sure how. how true that really is, I'm afraid, because there's a couple of angles to look at this. So on the one hand,
Reform and Green.
if we do see, if we on the one hand, if we do see reform
Mm,
continue as they are in the polls, there is the potential for reform just to eclipse the Tories in most of the seats, and
yeah.
essentially we'll continue in a two-party system between Labour and Reform, essentially just replacing the Tories.
Hmm.
However, there is a lot of evidence to the contrary, because even though the Tories, we laugh about them being dead in the water, and the boots on the ground people in Denton, they have been saying that there's been essentially no Conservative presence there at all. We have to remember the Conservatives still receive the most amount of money in donations per year. They still have
Hmm.
the highest election spendings. They still have associations with major think tanks. They've still got grassroots organizations in place. And especially in the Southeast, they also win their elections by large margins. And the only other party that's ever come near them, really, in the Southeast is usually the Liberal Democrats. And the
Mm.
people changing to reform are not usually conservatives from the Southeast. So it wouldn't surprise me if we still see, even with a very low vote share, the Conservatives hold on to still quite a lot of seats in the coming election.
I can understand where you're coming from with that, but what you're saying about them having a lot of culture and media, things like think tanks behind them and donors, what I'm thinking is those donors and those think tanks aren't necessarily married to the Conservative Party. They're married to conservatism in the messed up globalist sense we have now, where they basically just
Mhm.
want to hollow the country into an economic zone. So I think that if reform shows that they're not too extreme, they're not actually going to start dealing with legal immigration, then I think a lot of the donors behind the Conservatives will swap over just because it's a way to keep the money machine going. It's a way to keep hollowing out the country without putting in too much effort.
My perspective on this has changed recently. I'll explain why.
Mm-hmm.
My thinking was before the next election, we will still continue to see the old two parties receiving the majority of support from the establishment. And then once Reform does very well in that election and they show their moderate positions on many issues,
Mm.
then we start to see things change over. But what has actually thrown a spanner in the works in this is actually the creation of Restore Britain. The
Yes.
reason why I think this has changed my thinking on this, is because the characters that Restore Britain is attracting, which is primarily those of the nationalist wing, the patriotic wing, and those who hold beliefs which, even if they're not out and out unfavorable, they can bring negative media attention to the party, such as Reform, that they were previously in. We've seen people like, is it Layla Cunningham,
Mm-hmm.
calling Restore Britain members neo-Nazis, and
Yes.
we're actually seeing this distancing from nationalism with Reform a lot earlier than I anticipated. And the result of this, as you say, could be them being seen to be more moderate and therefore receiving more support.
They're playing a very obvious and dangerous balancing act because, on one
Mm,
hand, they want to be seen as the extreme option that is going to get away from the establishment. And that's why they are now adopting policies from Restore, which we'll talk more about in a minute. We'll go back to Gorton and Denton in just a second. But they're adopting extreme policies from Restore already. Things like the remigration of all illegal immigrants, the red list on certain countries, that sort of thing. They're taking a hardline stance, but they're also using their mouthpieces like Layla Cunningham to call out restorers neo-Nazis and to try and liken them to something completely unconscionable. And you got to ask where exactly they fall, if they fall anywhere principled and precise at all. And so I think that really what they're doing is they're playing it by ear. They are trying to be Janus, the two-faced god. On one hand, they're trying to be nationalists. On the other hand, they're trying to be regular people, let's say, quote unquote regular people, not like those Nazis.
mm. The thing is though that I see with this is that it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to translate into a higher vote share for them at the ballot box.
Now,
And the reason why I think this is because there was some success in the nationalist sphere for the BNP in looking at the late 90s going into
yeah.
the 2000s. And this is the time that UKIP was set up. and UKIP was, running a very similar playbook. Don't vote for the BNP; they're the true Nazis.
Mm.
Vote for UKIP because we are the patriotic but non-Nazi alternative. And we did see UKIP do reasonably well in the 2010 election. I believe they got something like 12% of the vote,
Mhm.
maybe 3 or 4 million voters.
Yeah,
And yet, what did they receive? Was it 1 or 2 seats at most? Because the
if that.
two-party system kept them out.
Mm.
So the idea that just simply calling Restore Britain, of whom a lot of the most loyal canvassers and most active online activists for reform have come from, especially Rupert Lowe, who's very engaged online, but he was also one of the hardest working MPs of any political party. To have them as an opposition, it could split votes and it could actually hinder reform's chances at the next election.
I think that what reform is doing is the worst thing possible that they could do. Being soft until you're pressed is showing people far, far before the election's even, on the doorstep, that you aren't going to stick to what you say and that you are true politicians. You're not
Mm.
common people. And what I think we're going to see, as we've already seen partially with the formation of Restore, is that you're going to get moderates who aren't, I wouldn't describe them as even civnets. You're going to get them slowly edge towards reform because of what they see destroying the country, like mass immigration, market capitalism, the evils of globalism, essentially, the complete hollowing out of our country spiritually and economically. They're going to move to reform, realize reform is not enough, and then they're going to move even further, say to advance or restore, probably advance then restore. And so I would say that reform, with what it's doing, is providing a very good bridge. They're almost a restore recruitment camp because they are exposing
Mm.
people, they're normalizing nationalism, but they're selling people a pyrite gem. And people will pick that
Yeah.
up and say, this isn't real. And they'll want more. And they'll end up just going to Restore for it. Because Restore is saying things and they're not immediately retreating from them. In fact, they're not retreating from them at all. They're staying completely
Mm.
firm on them, regardless of all the pressure. Things like kosher and halal slaughter, they are staying rock solid on them. You've got to give them
And
props for that.
this is actually a split, isn't it, between restore and reform? What we've seen in, well, probably I'd say since the early 2000s, really, is the right wing or the nationalist sphere, especially across Europe and especially in America and in England, there has been a demonization of Islamism, rightfully so. Islamic extremism has rightfully been denounced, but at the same time, no other religion has been denounced in the same way. And one way I like to showcase this is reform candidates have been free to talk about the negative effects of halal slaughter, and yet when they spoke about kosher slaughter, that was a step too far. All of a sudden, that infringed upon the rights of the Jewish community in the UK. And this is the difference we see with Restore Britain. Restore Britain has very clearly said they will make no discrimination between Muslims and Jews. They will ban all non-stun slaughter, which includes kosher and halal.
Mm-hmm. They talk a big game, and it seems like they mean to play it as well. So people have respect for that.
Yeah, absolutely. People seemingly are fed up with politics as a whole, voter apathy, voter alienation, and massive things in British politics. In the last election, correct me if I'm wrong, but it was the lowest ever turnout of any election we've had since records began. I believe it was down to 59% or
I was gonna
somewhere
say, I
along that
think it was
lines.
high fifties. Yeah, high fifties.
And if you look at Labour, who only got, was it like in the 30s of percent of those who did vote,
Mm.
if we actually extrapolate the data, that means Labour only received around 17% of the national vote, and they are currently holding a vast majority in Parliament. So one of the largest groups of voters are non-voters, and I don't think actually that reform is detracting too much from the Conservatives or taking away, masses from reform. I think they're taking some from reform, but I think they're also tapping massively into the politically homeless.
Mm. I agree. I think that Restore, as they've, well, I'll get on to why I think this in just a second, but I do agree that I think Restore is getting people who haven't voted and haven't joined a political party ever before, getting them out and getting them involved because they're providing real hope to these people. The reason I think that is I've seen a lot of people saying, anecdotally, that this is the first party they've joined, so on and so forth. But also, we're seeing record membership numbers in only a week and a half. They've jumped up to, probably by the time this comes out, 100,000 members. They've got at least 10,000 volunteers signed up through their online volunteering scheme, ready to go. And there's a lot of polls coming out right now that are asking people, if Rupert Lowe had a party, and obviously he does now, how many of you would vote for it? And so, if you believe those polls, and you also believe what another poll, which wasn't about who you'd vote for, but who you've heard of, if that's also true, then the 8% of people in the country who've heard of Rupert Lowe are the same 7% of people who said they'd vote for him. And if you believe those two things, he has an overwhelming majority of support from the people who know who he is and know what his policies are. And even if that is slightly inaccurate or quite inaccurate, he's probably got about 30 or 40% support from the people who know who he is. And obviously the people who don't know who he is yet, they're complete wildcards. You never know which way they could vote. But it certainly seems like people are coming out of the woodwork to support a party that unabashedly says it's fine to be British, not civically British, but ethnically British. It's fine to be religiously Christian. It's fine to call out what you see as social evils and economic evils as well. Things like kosher and halal slaughter. These things have only gotten a pass in our society for the last, 80 years because we live in the shadow of World War II and the supposed negative consequences of being proud of your country and wanting to protect your people. And so people are finally revolting against a liberal order that has told them to be ashamed of who they are, at least in the West. And we're finally seeing people say, no, I'm going to vote for whoever they decry as evil, because the media's been out to get me for the last 80 years. You can't trust them.
Yeah. Bringing that back to the polls you mentioned, I think this actually is a very interesting point. It highlights two things to me. So on the one hand, you've got certain members of Reform who are genuinely scared of this Restore split. As much as Nigel Farage wants to say that he's not bothered by minor parties, we are seeing large numbers move across from Reform to Restore. So I would imagine it's definitely been something they've thought about in Reform HQ. And we have actually seen a change in their messaging. They've started using the word restore in some of their online messaging. But what this symbolizes to me is they're trying to have it both ways. On the one hand, they're saying nobody knows who Rupert Lowe is. There's no point in joining a party. No one knows who he is.
Mm.
But on the other hand, they're also saying don't split the vote. But how are you going to split
Yes,
the vote if no one's heard of you?
exactly.
But speaking of the polls you were talking about, the one that has Rupert Lowe's party, there's two of them. Both of them that included Rupert Lowe's party as an option to vote for, also included the Your Party as an option to vote for. And that, specifically, the reason that was done was because the poll themselves, I think it was with Find Out Now, it was commissioned by Restore Britain. So
Mm.
what that means is, for people listening, is that the party Restore Britain, which is Rupert Lowe's party, they financed the poll being done, but it was using the same methodology as they always would. There's no bias in it at all. It's simply a sample size, and they've paid for themselves to be included as an option. What we saw was a party such as your party with less than 1% of support in that poll. And that's a party which had so much media hype from the left, and they were on the news for months. And yet, Rupert's party, I believe it was 12 days old, in both polls, one of them had them sitting at 10%, and one had them sitting at 7%. And all I'll say is no wonder the alarm bells are going off for Reform UK, if that's the kind of exponential growth that Rupert's bringing to the nationalist sphere.
You just have to look at polls and what other parties are getting in them to understand that Restore is going to be a real player soon. I'm just looking at a Find Out Now poll from October of last year. Plaid's on 1, SNP is on 2%, the Liberal Democrats are on 12%. And so for Restore now to be polling in individual different polls at about, 5 to 10%, it shows that, well, they're already a household name in a couple of places.
There's a problem though, isn't there? Because, for example, the SNP and Plaid Cymru, they're obviously going to have
Regional.
less support than,
Yeah.
yeah, because their votes are concentrated in very small areas like Scotland and Wales. The problem for a party like Restore, even with support of 10% of the electorate, I think I said earlier, UKIP managed to get 12% in the 2010 election, I believe it was, 4 million votes, and yet they still only had less than 5 MPs. It might be 1, 2. It was definitely less than 5. So Rupert really has to capitalize on this momentum he's gained. He has to keep himself relevant. It's like if you look at Ed Davey, he tries to keep his party relevant by doing ludicrous
By
stunts
being a
or
buffoon.
exactly. That's something we've seen a lot in British politics and American politics, really. Um, with the election of Donald Trump, he was supposed to be like a charismatic figure, regardless of what people think of Donald Trump. You knew who he was, and he made an impression. In the same way, Boris Johnson was slightly buffoonery, where he was rugby tackling children and couldn't open an umbrella, and he speaks gibberish. And it's the kind of things that people just look at him and they think, oh, he's not a threat. He's just a funny man. I'm going to vote for him,
Mm.
not on policy, but on not even charisma, more like the way you laugh at a dog. But that's the kind of opposite approach that Rupert's taking. Rupert's taking a very principled, very gentlemanly, very old English approach. And I think the reason this is going on, I think Restore has a very good mix of ages. Obviously, he is quite an elder gentleman, but then you've got people running the show behind the scenes, like Charlie Downs, who is what, mid 20s, early 20s. I can't name a young leader or person behind the scenes that I'm aware of in Reform who's of the same age and of the same kind of demographic as Charlie Downs, who's leading that message for the youth. Because when I think of Reform, I'm thinking of Nigel Farage, who himself is quite an elder man. We have Robert Jenrick. Sure, he's mid 40s, but he's a Tory in a different coloured suit. We've got Mohammed Zia Youssef, which, again, I don't think he's having much of a burden on the younger voters, especially in the nationalist sphere. So
Mm.
they don't really have this mix of older gentlemanly, principled, get behind me, Rupert Lowe style, as well as the Charlie Downs bringing youth energy and a bit of memes to the forefront.
Yeah, I think that they need to not become farcical because I think that will hurt a lot of voters. That will damage their confidence. But they do need to keep the limelight. And I think Rupert has done that well with things like the rape gang inquiry. That is a good way that he has kept himself amongst alternative media. And I think increasingly in the mainstream media, they've started to kind of correlate with it because they're talking about the Epstein files. And that is bringing people around to realizing just how messed up socially our country is. That's shedding light on Rupert. Things like that he's getting involved in and starting up himself. That I think is what he needs to continue doing because that is bringing people over into his camp. At least they're exposed to him.
Yeah, you mentioned Advance UK earlier. We mentioned Nick Buckley, the candidate for Advance UK. For those who don't know, Advance UK was set up by Benjamin Habib. He himself was involved early on with Reform UK. He was formerly an MEP in the Brexit Party, so a member of European Parliament, and he left when he felt he was pushed out by Nigel Farage. There's been some interactions online between, and especially behind the scenes between Rupert Lowe and Ben about a potential merger. But as a lot of people are aware, mergers aren't easy things to do because you've got party constitutions, you have different policies, you have different, like they've already got branches set up, they have different membership ideals. Mm. So there are logistical problems about bringing parties together. But
Mm.
what I saw today, because you mentioned Rupert Lowe's leading the rape gang investigation, which, he absolutely is doing an amazing job there. And he's actually getting some recognition from people who are otherwise silent, really, on politics. So Bear Grylls, for those of you who know, he heard of the rape gang inquiry. And if anybody's going to be in a cave for most of their life and not hearing politics and news, it's Bear Grylls. So him to hear of this and to comment on it because of Rupert Lowe's, to his audience as well, is a very good thing. The point was Ben Habib initially he gave £5,000 to the inquiry. My understanding is that he gave this money unconditionally to support the inquiry, but then when he felt like he wasn't getting enough say in the direction of it or being kept up to date enough,
Wanted to
he
withdraw.
actually was off. Yeah, well, there's dispute over exactly what was said.
Yeah.
My understanding is that Rupert offered him the money back in return for him trying to control the rape gang inquiry, to which he hastily accepted the money. So I don't really see Ben Habib lasting too long in the nationalist sphere. I feel like the majority of those who are truly nationalist in Advance UK will, if they haven't already, jump ship to Restore, especially those who are quite annoyed at the overtly pro Tommy Robinson, pro Israel camp that is very loud, even if they are a minority within Advance UK.
Ben Habib with the £5,000 seems linked to something else that has been mentioned or not mentioned by us, but something that came up in the media very recently. It might have been the story from today, actually, that someone has come forward, one of the children of a rape gang survivor who's given testimony in Rupert's inquiry, and the son has said that apparently the inquiry's only using the mum for exposure and political gain, and that coming right on the heel as well of the £5,000, which seems like it was publicised in order to make Rupert look bad, to make him seem like he was trying to make it about himself and restore. It does seem like there's now a calculated attempt going on from Advance and the wider media to discredit Rupert and what he's tried to do with the rape gang inquiry, which I think is classic media tactics. Try and make something that is objectively good appear bad in a certain light. I don't think Ben Habib will last long in nationalism either. You can go for very low-hanging fruit and say, he's mixed race. I don't subscribe to that because I think it's a very low IQ take. I think that he won't last long because, well, you see that his party took a certain amount of time, quite a few months now, to get to 40,000 members, and he probably launched his party too early. He launched his party too early, rather than securing the online presence before launching, which is what Rupert did. He made his party and then tried to secure an online presence and to get attention. Whereas Rupert, by setting up Restore Britain as a movement first, and then transitioning into a political party, after he'd done his inquiry, after he'd broken from Reform, all of this sort of stuff, well, he's just rocketed to the top of the news, to the top of polls. It was a coup de grace, basically, from him. Ben Habib doesn't seem to show that level of strategy.
The thing is with Ben Habib, I think he's a very well-meaning person. I think he's a very intellectually smart person. My problem with him is that he doesn't, as you mentioned, he doesn't garner the same kind of support that Rupert does. Behind Rupert Lowe, you've got a very young, energetic crowd. You've got people who are very hungry for Restore. Whereas behind Benjamin Habib, you have civic nationalists predominantly, like the Tommy Robinson types. I'm not going to speak badly about any group of people, especially not Advance UK members, who are on the whole probably lovely people.
Same for most parties, I'd say.
Yeah, exactly. The problem is though that with the Tommy Robinson look, when I think of Tommy Robinson, I think of people marching down the street, getting drunk, shouting at minorities, achieving nothing, and going home and having a curry. And that's the kind of activism that has stunted nationalism for the better half of 2 decades in the UK, because people don't see the problem. They just see people shouting without any kind of direction, and that's the problem we've had with nationalism. There's been no sensible intellectualism, whereas Rupert is a man who is very clearly an intellectual. He sets forward his case and his policies, and it's generated a lot of support for him. I've got up on here on my screen right now. I've just opened up his mass deportations plan. It's a 113-page document, and it includes huge amounts of information about logistics and actually attaining his goals. So I think where Reform have dog whistles and sound bites, Rupert Lowe has substance and policies.
I mean, it's evidenced by the inquiry as well. He said he'd do an inquiry. He did one. Whereas Reform is they're trying to caveat it by saying when we get into government, we'll do one, an official one. Rupert said, I don't care about official or unofficial. The effect is achieved by doing it whenever you do it. I think, it's just a matter of action, not words.
There's also what I was just saying a second ago about his policies. There is a note section here on the mass deportation document of acknowledgement.
Yes.
Let me just read some of these names to you, and you will see he's got support from a very wide range of civic nationalists, patriots, nationalists as a whole. Listen to some of these names. So we've got Carl Benjamin, we've got Lewis Brackpool. I was talking to you earlier about him. He was, I believe he was at least, formerly Reform. When I was working with Turning Point UK, I think he was at least Turning Point UK adjacent. And then he left and he went to work for Rebel Media, which I believe is a Canadian company. But yeah, another big name online. And again, another these are young people.
Yeah, he's in his 20s, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, and then at the opposite end of the spectrum, we have here with William Clouston,
Yes.
the leader of the SDP, is he?
Leader of the SDP. I wanted to mention that when we were talking about Gordon and Denton, but yes, William Clouston.
again, a very intellectual man. He comes from a different kind of nationalistic or patriotic sphere to Lewis Brackpool and to Carl Benjamin. But again, this is showing the diversity of both age and opinion behind Rupert Lowe in creating his policies. Stephen Edgington. We've also got Connor Tomlinson and
Another
Dan
big name.
Wootton as well. He's a GB News host, I believe.
It's a cavalcade of young people, young names who are all. I would say a lot of them are actually just getting into the movement. Seems like Lewis is only getting into the limelight in the last year. Connor
Well,
Tomlinson, yeah,
Lewis
you said he was
Brackpool,
Rebel Media before, and before
he's been
that
he's
he
been around for a
was
while, yeah.
2P. But it seems like
But
he's only stepping into the limelight now.
yeah, I would agree with that. And as you said, like that when you say stepping into the limelight, I think it really is like the kind of age demographic they are as well. They've
Yeah.
kind of been engaged in the movement for a few years under the surface, and
Mm-hmm.
now they come into that age of, well, they've probably been in the age of maturity for a while now, and now it's really taking off, and they're coming to the forefront, and people like Rupert are picking them up as intellectual people and people we need for the movement.
Well, Rupert and Restore again are showing a great advantage and a great virtue in the fact that they are willing to listen to young people, genuinely listen to young people and include them. You don't see that from Reform, you don't see that from the Conservatives, Labour. The Greens play it, but they don't really. They're catering to certain ethnic and religious groups. But Restore seems to be the only party that is actually saying young people are the future and we want to put them right at the heart of it.
Yeah, exactly. And what I find really interesting as well is in this document, Rupert very clearly lays out the legal obstacles to mass deportations, and then he outlines his plan to overcome those legal challenges. We have been talking for ages and ages about, for example, the 1952, I believe it is, Refugee Convention. We've been
51.
talking about oh,
I think it is.
1951.
Yeah.
We've been talking about the Human Rights Act. We've been talking about all these legal problems.
ECHR,
Ref-
things like this. Yeah.
yeah, and they've never come up with an answer. They've never come up with a roadmap. And Reform have been in the news now for a couple of years. Even with the Brexit Party, they were talking about immigration problems, especially refugee problems. But then again, again, this is probably a point of nuance. I don't see refugees as a problem in comparison to legal migration. When you compare the two, it's a drop in the ocean, isn't it? Like we
Yeah.
get is it it's still a problem. People arriving without being checked, and obviously that is
Big
something that needs to be
problem.
addressed.
But it's not the
But
only
people
problem.
like Reform, yeah, Reform is trying to paint this picture that the let's say it's 100,000 people coming a year is a massive problem, but the 1.3 million coming legally is no problem, purely on
Yeah.
the basis that they've been checked.
People are saying, oh, immigration's actually down. Net immigration's down in the last year or two. And it's only down because hundreds of thousands of people are also leaving. We have like 1 million coming in and 700 or 800,000 going out. And the question there is, what kind of people do we have leaving? Well, anecdotally, there was a big news story about a month or two ago that loads of Polish people are leaving the UK, and
Yeah,
they're not British. I wouldn't be the person who breaks ranks and says they are, but I think generally they are a demographic that contributes a lot more than
they're
than
replacements.
the people who are coming in now. And they're taking British spouses with them, and also, apart from the Polish question, there's loads of regular British people starting to leave now. So,
Hmm.
what is being used to fill that gap? Well, it's much more
Well, those
complicated than the 200 or 300,000 net migration figure suggests, basically.
yeah, the one thing that I've heard constantly growing up was we need immigration, for example, for the NHS. Now, without even getting into the whole, well, obviously immigrants themselves need to use NHS and their families, which adds to the problem. There was recently, I believe it was by the British Medical Association, I think they said
Hmm.
around 40% of homegrown British doctors or people with British medical degrees are struggling to find work in this country.
Yes, yes,
And
I
that is
saw this.
staggering because all we are doing is we are giving jobs to people who are willing to work on the cheap from foreign countries. So that's a two-way problem because these other countries are investing resources in their own people to be doctors for their own countries, and then after investing in their own people, they're being stolen by Britain, and those countries are then left without their own doctors, and then we're taking them to replace our own doctors who can't get jobs, and that is a massive, massive problem that's going on for young doctors in this country.
Yeah, it's true in not just the medical industry, but across all graduate jobs. I saw a very alarming statistic today, which I think you can corroborate, otherwise we're going to have to fact check it on the fly. But for every 900,000 graduates, which is what you get a year in the UK, there are 10,000 graduate jobs.
It wouldn't surprise me. We are at the lowest ratio, I think, since the 2008 financial crash. Yeah. The problem is then the graduates are then applying for every single job they see. They're just throwing mud at the wall to see what sticks. And then we're getting graduates into jobs they're not specifically trained for. And then productivity's gone down because
Everyone's stepping on each
people
other's
aren't getting into the
toes.
fields. Yeah.
Yeah. Apparently, it's anywhere between 15 to 40,000 graduate jobs. So it's definitely not five figures. Even if you assume it's 40 or 50,000, that's 1 in 18 people being offered a job out of uni. The rest of the people
And
just
that
have to
is,
fight each other for the scraps, which is insane.
but not only that, let's remember, most of the people who go to university, myself included, we're on student loans. We take out these debts normally because they're encouraged by the government. Because when we're in school, we're told to go to university, take out these loans. We're told to do a good degree and then pay it back in the long term. And that's what we should be doing. That's what we're being taught since we're young. And that's what many of us are doing. And now we're not getting jobs or we're not getting high paying jobs. And those loans that we have, they've got interest rates on them from between 3 to 7%
Mm.
yearly interest, compound interest. And all that's going on is these debts are getting higher and higher and higher, and nobody's paying them off. And now, my year group is the first one for the government who's extended the amount to repay them. So, the year before me and every year prior to me, if you hadn't paid off your loan within 30 years, the government would wipe it off
Yeah.
and they'd pay it themselves. So, yeah, it doesn't just get wiped off. These people giving us the loans is called the student loan companies. From some light reading, it seems that friends of David Cameron have their hands in these companies, and these companies are guaranteed profit-making machines because either the students pay it back at guaranteed rates of, remember, about 3 to 7% interest rates a year, and if they don't pay it back, the government pays them.
Mm.
So it's a lucrative market for these people who own the student loans companies, and it's bad news for the students and there's nothing we can do about it. And then, but my year now, it's changed from 30 years to wipe it off to 40 years. So I'm supposed to be working until I'm almost 70 to pay back my student loan. Luckily, I'm in a field which pays very well, so I don't have to worry as much as other people do. But there will be many people in my position who have done my course, who have done well, but they can't find these graduate jobs. And they'll be paying back this loan until they're 70. Their interest will be going through the roof and then the taxpayer has to bail it out anyway, just for the profit of these student loan companies. And they wonder why English people are fleeing this country en masse to places like Australia, to places like Poland, because Poland, I think, is by 2035, is supposed to have a higher predicted GDP than the UK.
It's growing
No
very
wonder,
quickly. Yeah.
absolutely, no wonder young people are leaving, and I don't blame them.
It's growing incredibly quickly, Poland. It's well, it just shows that if you actually manage your country in in the interest of the people, it'll do well. And if you don't, if you allow corruption to become rife, it'll sink. The 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 point about now we have to work 40 years of our lives just to work against interest that is always mounting. Well, it's a very good incentive for people who, if they can't make it in the UK within 5 years of graduating, to just permanently emigrate. You
Yeah,
know,
because it's not going to follow them really. It's not going to be
uh,
enforced.
well, I know someone
Well,
who went abroad, taught English, and they studied at university to do that. You have to for the certain program he was on, and he would just ignore. He could just ignore emergency revenue letters that came to say about, oh, you need to pay this back, and just bin them. And
well, it's because the
they
loans
can't
aren't
chase
the
you.
same as, yeah, it's not, it's a different kind of loan you're signing up for. So if you owe money to a private person in the UK and
Can't be
then you
chased.
flee with your assets to another country, you can get a judgment in the courts in this country, and then through private international law, you can then seek to have that award it recognized and enforced by a foreign country. But because of the way the student loans are structured, because there's no deadline to repay, because remember, this is with you for life until you
Yeah.
repay or it's wiped. Because there's never a point of enforceability, you can just ignore it and you
Mm.
can essentially escape it. I mean, I'm sure there are ways that the government tries to get their money back.
With
The
closer
same way,
countries, they'll be able to try and chase you up. But
yeah, but that was a massive problem that was uncovered in America, where especially Chinese university students were coming over to study in America,
and then leaving.
taking out lots of money and then leaving because China would refuse to implement or enforce
They'd
and
never extradite
recognize.
anyone. Yeah. They would
Yeah.
never recognise a debt from the Americans, would they?
No. So it's a very there is the idea of comity between nation states and mutual recognition and enforcement. But in the modern day, these sums are so low. Oh, and also when it's seen as a tax or a penalty, countries aren't under legal obligations to enforce them anyway. Let's pretend like somebody was in France, and I believe France has a different way of structuring student loans. But if it was the same way England did, and then a French student fled to England with their assets, we actually wouldn't enforce their debt against them because it's to the government itself as a form of taxation rather than being a debt repaid from tort law, which is just a niche thing I find quite interesting. But
That is
turning this
interesting.
conversation back to the Gorton and Denton by-election, I believe you wish to say something about the SDP.
Yeah, I was going to say when we were running down the list of candidates, I made a post about it on Twitter today, but I'll reiterate what I said there. Here, I really hope that Nick Buckley and Sebastian Moore, who's running for the SDP, I really hope they do well. I don't think they'll win. In fact, I think the SDP is surely not going to win, and Nick Buckley doesn't stand a great chance. Because as we were saying, it's kind of a two-horse, maybe three-horse race between Labour, Green and Reform. I hope they do well, though, those two, because they are both local. You know, as you said, Nick Buckley's lived there for decades, I think his whole life, actually. Sebastian's lived there for a couple of years since returning to the country. They have both contributed to the area quite a lot. You know, they're really in touch with the struggles of those local people, and they represent parties that I do think generally have the interests of the British people at heart. And it might not be tactical to vote for them, but I do think that as we approach a multi-party system once again, and there's a lot more confusion over who's going to win where and how people's hearts are going to be affected by all of the political wins. I do think people have to start trying to vote with principle again rather than with tactics, because the only way we're going to build a country that we're proud of and that is actually angling upwards morally is to stand on principle and to put your money where your mouth is. You can't forever just cop out and say, I'm not going to put in the effort to publicise the SDP, for example, and go volunteering, go leafleting or canvassing for them, just because I don't think they'll win. They won't win if all the people who would support the SDP abdicated their responsibility. It's true for the NDP as well. I would be pushing our
Hmm.
members in an election to say, even if we're not going to win, I want people to stand and fight, because you surrender, there's no chance of winning. Lay down your arms, there's no chance of winning. You
I'm
have
going to
to
push
go
back
through to the bitter
slightly
end.
on that idea,
Hmm.
um, purely on the fact that from what I'm looking at here on my phone, so Gorton and Denton polling, this is from Opinion Research from the
Yeah.
16th to the 24th of February. This breaks down the polling intentions of the sample size by race, and it
Hmm.
groups white and other, so other being ethnic minority voters.
Hmm.
And what we are seeing is no longer people voting based on principle. So this is
Hmm.
a slightly different to what you're saying.
Yeah,
I think people are no longer going to start voting by principle.
but
They're
tribally.
going to start voting by race. It's
Yeah.
tribalism.
Yeah.
And this stats here definitely prove it. So what we're looking at here is the white vote from this opinion polling shows 3% of white people are planning to vote for the Liberal Democrats of those polled, 5% the Conservatives, 22% for Labour, 23% for the Green Party, which blows my mind. Predominantly that is young people. They are
Yes.
in polls. It's for the 18 to 29-year-old category. It's consistently showing the Green Party at around 40%
It's
polling, which is diabolical.
staggering.
But then, yeah, and then Reform Party for white people at 41%. But then we look at the ethnic minority
It's like
polling
45% green,
intention.
isn't it?
It's 37% Green, 36% Labour, 8% Reform. So that's the reason we have a three-horse race
Three-party
in this
race.
election,
Yeah.
because Gorton and Denton has a very large ethnic minority community. And
Yeah, and
that is the
Laven's home.
reason why, yeah, so now we are seeing essentially a three-way split between Reform, the Greens, and Labour.
Labour. That is exactly why I would say, though, that people need to vote on principle. If you are just tactically voting, you're going to support this degeneration of democratic politics into a tribalistic headcount. What people need to expose as soon as possible to all of those young Green and Labour white voters, all those young white Green and Labour voters, is the system they are playing into. The parties that they're supporting are parties that now trade entirely on unintegrated communities. All of those young, white, mostly university students that are voting for the Greens need to realize that what they are supporting is not a system of tolerance, not a system of peace, not a system of morality or kindness. They are essentially enslaved into a cult which punishes nobody but white people. That is what they need to wake up to, and the more the more young white people, or even anyone who's white British, who is going out and voting Labour or Green tactically to get a left wing government or whatever, or even just on our side of politics, who is tactically voting Reform and playing into a corrupt party, they are just reinforcing poor ethics in politics, I think. Whereas really what we need to do is get good ethics going and hope that all these young people who are voting for the replacement of our people are going to cotton on and start taking it up themselves. Otherwise,
Well,
we're fucked.
what's interesting, as you mentioned, the Green Party and the Labour Party are supposed to be seen these bastions of true cultural integration, of a true success of multiculturalism. If it is the case that multiculturalism and assimilation are working, then why is the Green Party putting out their adverts in
Urdu
Urdu?
and Bangla.
Because if the idea is that they've assimilated and we're all one big happy family of multiculturalism, that there shouldn't be demand for these people to be seeing it in a foreign language. If they want to speak multiple languages, then that's amazing that they can speak multiple languages, and the country's better for people speaking multiple languages. But if the reason you have to put out an election campaign in a foreign language is because people in the constituency don't even speak the national language, then we're not seeing multiculturalism and assimilation in a positive way for Britain. What we are seeing is divisiveness. We are seeing cultures juxtaposed to each other. We are seeing tribalism. And I don't know how much longer, really, we are going to end up seeing a unified Green Party or Labour Party. Because as time goes on, as demographics in Britain continue to change, we are going to see ethnic minority interests compete with each other within these parties.
Yeah,
And what
we
I
are.
mean by this, we're already seeing on some fringes of the Green Party, we're seeing the massive juxtaposition of the Islamist voting bloc, supported by the Muslim Council of Britain. And we're seeing that as opposed to the trans rights and LGBT wing of the Green Party. For now, the friction that is between them is being held together by mutual support for Gaza. But I think once this issue no longer sits at the forefront of British politics, we're going to see traditional conservative Muslims no longer feeling at home with a Green Party who's explicitly calling for these progressive policies. We're going to see Hindus and Sikhs no longer feeling represented by Labour, even though they're ethnic minority, because Labour is supporting perhaps the Muslim bloc versus the ethnic Indian bloc. And we are going to start to see tribalism in the UK, and that's going to lead to the destruction of the traditional political parties. And I really fear for Britain at that point when communities are set against each other, because it wasn't that long ago. There was, I think it was in Leicester, we had Indian Hindus and Pakistani Muslims fighting in the street because of tensions happening with their countries thousands of miles away. And that's the kind of thing that's going to start playing out at elections and playing out in the streets.
Yeah, we are literally just going to see that. It's going to get worse and worse. The second that the Green Party or the Labour Party start trying to push stuff like pride, as you said, progressive policies, it's gonna balkanize. We're not even discussing like what is going to happen with the fact that Keir Starmer is very in deep with Israel. What is going to happen between Palestine and Israel? Those parties are going to have to choose sides, aren't they?
Yeah, so they are uniquely situated in Labour and the Green Party because both of them seem to be having some support for Palestine, a lot more overt support coming from the Green Party, especially with Keir Starmer seemingly supporting the more continuing sales of arms to Israel has been a key thing that many of the Muslim voting bloc have turned away from Labour because of. But what's interesting is the leader of the Green Party, Zach Polansky, is an openly Jewish man against
Mm-hmm.
Israel. And the leader of the Labour Party is Keir Starmer, and his wife is Jewish, and his children go to a Jewish school, and they are Jewish. So we have two Jewish people in charge of two of the largest political parties in the UK, and their members are very anti-Israel, but many of them themselves anti-Jewish as a whole.
Mm.
So the real question is, how long will the Islamist bloc vote for Zach Palansky purely on the basis that he's anti-Gaza when he's also Jewish and supportive of progressive policies? I don't believe it will go on for very long, and I think it won't be long before we start seeing, well, we're already seeing in Birmingham, we're seeing independent councillors sitting or running in groups. Now they're not giving themselves a party name, they're not an official bloc, but they are running on a pro-Islamic platform. And the reason I think they're not choosing to have a party is because I think the general public, once they start seeing an overtly Islamic party in Parliament, alarm bells will start ringing for the ordinary voter, and they're no
Mm.
longer going to see unity. Because if there's an Islamic party, I would imagine a large amount of support the Muslim vote would be detracted from Labour and from the Green Party. They'd probably win a couple
Yeah.
seats in areas such as Oldham, up in the
Birmingham.
northern constituencies, in Birmingham. Yeah, because Yaqub, he did rather well in the mayoral election. He didn't win, luckily.
God.
But that would scare the ordinary voter who's still voting for the Conservatives or voting for
Labour
Labour
or
or Reform, or
Green
even the
even.
old people go for Green. Yeah, if they start seeing openly Islamist MPs, I would imagine that would be a very big shock to the system.
Yeah, I agree. Well, it's just going to prove to people that, yeah, it is becoming tribal. All the conspiracy theories people have been going on about are actually coming true.
Coming back to the Gorton and Denton by-election, as this is the principal thing we are discussing today, who do you want to win this election? Genuinely. So I'm not saying considering the SDP or Advance UK, because as
Oh,
much as we
okay.
might like those candidates,
Yeah.
we know they're not going to win.
I was going to say, in a
But
dream world, I would like the SDP to win, really. But
yeah,
presuming people who are actually in the race, well, Reform, really, because they are the closest thing to nationalism that we have. At the same time, however, I just don't think it's likely. I do think that of the people involved, it is most likely to be the Greens.
see, I've got a different way of thinking, but you may call
Do,
it accelerationism.
do
But
you think? Do
uh,
you want the Greens to win in order to make it, well, to make it clear that they are actually serious about their drug policy and all the other mad shit they're on about?
no, I'm actually hoping Labour managed to get a win here, which
Oh,
many people may wonder why I would even say something as
whoa.
horrent as that. Because here's my thinking: if Labour manages to win this election, which has been painted by the media somewhat as a two-horse race between the Greens and Reform, then the person who feels Reform and Greens are two extremes are going to gravitate towards Labour. And what we're going to see is a support of the Green Party shrink and more people returning to a traditional Labour perspective. Whilst in government, the Labour Party, we have to give them some kudos in some ways. Deportations are up, migration statistics are down, and it's nowhere near enough, but it's the right direction. To have the Green Party replace the Labour Party in many of these areas would absolutely flood our country with drugs. They would open the borders unconditionally, and it would be absolute demographic replacement. So I think managing to bring people back to the Labour Party, showing them it's not dead, would also encourage maybe conservative voters who absolutely loathe the Labour Party, but maybe more agnostic perhaps to the Green Party,
Mm.
that they're not really antagonistic towards them because maybe they don't really care. They hear the Green Party, they just think of some old people who want to plant trees. Um, they may actually give them the boot they need to move rightward to restore Britain or to reform. But also, and that's the other reason why I don't particularly want reform to win. If reform wins, all we're going to hear constantly on the right of the spectrum is don't vote for restore, don't
Yeah.
vote for anybody to the right because you're going
Reform
to
could
split the
win.
vote.
Yeah.
Reform can win. We're going to get somebody in Parliament like Matt Goodwin, who I believe is extremely pro Israel, and it's going to paint the movement even further. Matt Goodwin even received the support of Tommy Robinson. That would also bring some of the Advance UK members away from Ben Habib and back to Reform and get the Reform train up and going. So I
Mm-hmm.
think, in the benefit of accelerationism, the best case would probably be a Labour victory. Because also, the people talking about who they want to win this election, in the grand scheme of things, this
It's not a
by-election
big
really
election,
means
no.
nothing. It
No.
means nothing. Labour's not going to lose their majority in Parliament. It's the actual elections are still years away, so it's going to have no burden at all on those elections. The only thing this is going to be is good for PR for whichever party that wins. And
Mm.
if you want Reform to win the next election, which again I think Nigel Farage will not be a good leader,
No.
I think he'd be a detriment to nationalism. But if you do want him to be the next prime minister, you want reform to win here. If you want the Green parties to continue to gain the minority votes off Labour and continue to bolster their ranks with young people, you want the Greens to win here.
Yeah.
If you don't want either of those things to happen, but
Vote
you
Labour.
still don't want Labour, you got to vote Labour.
Yeah.
And again, I wouldn't vote for Labour. I never vote tactically. Although I will say in the last election, I did vote for Reform because they were the only nationalist on the ballot box at all.
Mm,
So never spoil your votes. Never vote tactically for a party that you know is never going to serve your people's interests.
yeah.
But I do actually think the best case outcome for nationalists as a whole is for Labour to win this by-election.
I can understand.
So I believe the last thing we have to discuss then before we wrap up this week's episode is the death in
Tragic
France.
death.
So I'm looking here at an article about it.
I was going
And
to
what's
say,
staggering to me,
I was going to say quickly, sorry, it's not a death either. It was a horrible fucking murder. They just beat him down and killed him in the street.
That's exactly what I was about to say. I was about to say that the MSM, the mainstream media, they're saying death of far-right activist. How perverted and sadistic does the mainstream media have to be to call the murder of a peaceful activist, one, refuse to say it's murder or even comment upon the intent of it? It just sounds like he died of a heart attack.
Yeah.
And two, to frame him as a far-right activist, it's somehow implying that his death was warranted based on his political beliefs.
Yes, it is. Or that you shouldn't feel as bad about it because of his political belief.
And actually, this is something we can relate to British politics when we have people like Layla Cunningham, and that she's calling people on the right of her, and she's a reform candidate herself, as a Muslim woman from Egypt. She's calling people slightly to the right of her who are nationalists and born and bred Englishmen. She's calling them neo-Nazis purely because they support Rupert Lowe. This is the kind of rhetoric which we saw got Charlie Kirk killed. This is the rhetoric which we're now seeing after this peaceful man in France who was defending women protesters, by the way. He was security for them. He did nothing wrong. He was murdered as well. This kind of language is going to lead to violence against British people, and we cannot stand for it. This article I'm reading here says French President Emmanuel Macron has called for calm ahead of rallies planned in Saturday by far-right groups in memory of the activist. It's not about far-right groups in memory of the activist. It's genuine people giving their respect to somebody who was murdered at the hands of Antifa, who should, by all accounts, be a terrorist organization. And thank God Hungary has taken the lead in banning them.
Yes, thank God for Hungary. I mean, don't get me wrong, Orban's not perfect, but when he actually stands up and says things like Antifa needs to be banned, yeah, I
even
think
this article, it says, how did he die? And the next sentence is, the brawl was caught on video. That was not a brawl.
No,
that was a sadistic.
He was
That was
jumped.
a hunt. He
Yeah.
was jumped. He was beaten to an inch of his life. He was barely fighting back. He was protecting for his own life, trying to leave. He never attacked them, and they murdered him in cold blood. And the mainstream media is calling it a brawl, as if somehow he was party to the violence.
Yeah, this is just why you can't trust mainstream media anymore. You have to completely detox yourself from basically the propaganda of mainstream media, because all it will tell you is that loving your people and standing up for decent principles is evil. You just have to start, ignoring it. And yeah, I wish all the best towards the people who are gonna rally on Saturday and stand up in his name. We need to do more things like that, and we need to normalize it for regular people and tell them it's not far right to commemorate the death of someone. They tore apart cities in the US for a convicted felon, but they're not going to rally to stand up for a regular young bloke he was faithful, he was good to his family, good to his friends.
Catholic.
Yeah, that's what I meant. Yeah, faithful. He's got a good head on his shoulders, and he was looking after young women in his movement. What happened to the left loving women and wanting to protect them? It just disappeared, didn't it? It evaporated. Their supposed principles always evaporate under pressure.
The problem is they always say Antifa can't be banned because it's a decentralized network. Well, if it's a decentralized network, how do they have headquarters in Manchester? If it's a decentralized network, how do they have these groups organizing? How do they have a common banner? How do they have Telegram and WhatsApp group chats? How do they have local chapter leaders? This is a terrorist organization who are known for causing violence, who are known for using drugs. These people need to be banned and put in jail.
They could turn out all of the resources of the state to catch groups like Combat 18 and National Action, and they could destroy them. But they can't do it for Antifa, apparently, even though they parade out in public far more brazenly than those, extreme organizations ever did. They just don't want to prosecute Antifa, and that is why we need to stand up for ourselves, defend ourselves from them. Obviously, passively, I'm not calling for violence with that, but we need to be prepared to stand up and defend ourselves, and to speak out against it, and to build a alternative media that reaches young people, or any kind of people really, native people, and publicizes it.
There's a massive disconnect as well between what's being said by the political classes and what's being said by everyday French people about this.
Yeah.
So on the one hand, this French news network I'm reading here now, this is talk. So here it says, "What's the reaction been in France?" And it says his death has sparked several incidents. It talks about how his people who have been commemorating him have had swastikas and they've had anti-Semitic slogans and they're neo-Nazis. And this is essentially the line that the French mainstream media is running with. So this is not just the British MSM. This is how the French are running with it as well.
Mm.
But on an anecdotal level, I've got a friend at my university who I won't name, of course, and she is a very non-political individual. I thought it was very funny because Macron is one of the most disliked people in France, and I've never heard of anybody who actually votes for him, especially not young people, because the young people in France are all polarized.
Mm.
And yet she herself voted for Macron at the last election purely because of I see on Instagram Reels you see what people are liking. It turns out she now follows and is supporting Marine Le Pen, and she's actually switched allegiance because she can't believe the mainstream media reaction and how the left have celebrated the death of him. They've been posting things like saying there's no the only good Nazi is a dead Nazi, when this was just a regular peaceful Catholic man murdered in the street. And I think regular people who are politically unengaged or they're politically homeless, or they are just regular people who vote for the current establishment, they're being radicalized by what they're seeing on the left.
Yeah. Yeah, they are. It's becoming so brazen. They have to become so brazen to protect their ideology to the point where they have to physically attack and murder young right wingers that regular people, cannot ignore it anymore. Regular people, I think, on the whole, across the West, they are adverse to violence. They're adverse to things like bullying, essentially. It's so ingrained into us in our media that bullying is wrong that when they see something like this, dozens of people attacking one man and killing him, it affects you deep down. And I don't think that a mind can exist in contradiction with itself. You end up having to face reality. And the reality is you're either a bad person or you're a good person, and you come down on the side of peace and justice, and you stand up for someone like Quentin.
The nerve of people online to say, "Oh, so you're against Antifa, that means you're pro-fascist." These people have no intellectual reasoning abilities at all, because they're saying, "Well, we can't be the bad guys because we're called the anti-bad guys."
Yeah.
Like, what kind of logic is that? That's like
Sam,
it makes no sense at all.
Sam, I'm against the Democratic Republic of Korea, so I must be anti-democratic. It's just
Ah, I
that's just
see
the
now.
way
I
it is.
see.
That's just the way it is.
I see. The
Yeah.
same people who will swear on their mother and father that Mao and Lenin weren't communists because they didn't live up to a purist ideology will also tell you that Antifa must be the good guys because if you oppose Antifa, you must be a fascist by definition. These people, on the one hand, strive for definitional purity, and on the other hand, they're so liberal with the words that it makes no absolute sense. It's ridiculous, and
They're,
the sooner they're banned, the better.
they're fundamentally just unserious people. They're not interested in serious politics or debate. They are simply interested in getting their way, no matter what method it takes, and that is up to and including violence and murder. You shouldn't meet these people in debate. You shouldn't meet these people in a political ground. You should just be prepared to defend yourself from them when they inevitably lash out and try to kill you. That's all you can do.
Yeah, and if you look at these, if you've seen people exposing like their headquarters in Manchester, for example, and there's quite a few videos on this, it's literally it's a bunch of squatters who have taken over massive warehouses that have been abandoned, and they've got crack dens and sex rooms in there, and it's a bunch of homeless people do drugs who have sex with each other, And it's just vermin, repulsiveness. It's the dregs of society banding together, using political violence against anybody they don't like, and they're just a tool of the establishment to keep nationalists down. And that's
Basically.
why the establishment refuses to legislate against them. It's why they refuse to investigate them. And ultimately, it's why that poor man in France is now dead.
Yeah. And there will be more.
Unfortunately, yeah.
Yeah. I don't say that with any pleasure. I say that with certainty. There will be more, and on both sides, because what happened is going to lead to escalation. There are going to now be young nationalists who think that all bets are off and the only way you can get your way in politics is through the sword. It's unfortunate to say,
Well,
but I think we
that's
are
the
going to.
message.
That's
That's
what we're
the
going to see.
message that they're giving, isn't it? By not
Yes,
prosecuting people, by not taking action against the Antifa, they're essentially giving the green light to any nationalist in France and saying, well, we're not gonna prescribe this group as a terror group. So if you do the same thing and you murder people you don't like, we won't do the same to you. And if they do
it
prescribe them as terrorist
exposes
groups,
hypocrisy.
it exposes hypocrisy, and the nationalists will be angry. And why would you care about law and order if you believe that the law and order is against you?
Yeah,
And again, this is not a call for violence at all. 100% never
this is
take this into your own
observation.
hands.
This is just
But
observation.
this is going to happen. We've already seen thousands of nationalists in France, and I've seen videos of Antifa fighting with them in the street. If the police refuse to arrest these groups, and if the state refuses to ban these violent murdering groups, you will see strife in the streets. And this isn't even ethnic strife, this is just political unrest. And it will result in a lot more injuries, unfortunately.
Yeah, yeah, and worse than injury.
Well, yeah, we've already seen that, unfortunately, in France.
Yeah,
But that's all I've got to say on the topics for today.
yeah, um, yeah. I encourage anyone who's listening to do your best to publicize Quanton's tragic murder and to just try and wake up as many people as possible to what is happening in the West right now, because we all know that things are bad, but I don't think many people understand how really bad things are. You know, I saw a video today, unprompted, and it must be taken down by now. I saw a video today of a non-stun slaughter. It just came up on Twitter from an unmarked account. It is horrifying, a truly horrifying act of hatred against animals. Being a Christian, I don't believe animals have souls, but I still believe they can feel pain. I still believe they can
They're still
feel,
sentient, obviously, yeah.
yeah, they can still feel fear and pain, and to want to cause that or to simply be oblivious to it, it is truly evil. Just truly
They're still
evil.
part of God's creation, of course, and why would we
Exactly.
want to cause harm to God's creation?
Exactly.
And that is actually a very good point you bring up. That if it wasn't for these organizations such as Twitter, I mean, people can criticize Twitter all day long for the nationalists it bans, and I agree with them. If it truly wants to be a platform for free speech,
Yeah,
it shouldn't
needs
be
to be
banning these
fully.
nationalists.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it does allow the freedom of ideas, this marketplace of ideas, that liberals used to advocate for the marketplace of ideas. They said, once there's a marketplace of ideas, may the best idea win. And now we are seeing this marketplace of ideas, and people are horrified about what they're seeing, what's going on in the world. And now the liberals are trying to shut it down.
Well, we're seeing the marketplace of ideas come down on the side of nationalism. The marketplace of
Exactly, which is
ideas
why the
is
liberal,
performing as intended, but it's why they've suddenly
which is
turned on it.
yeah, that's why the liberals now, who have been advocating for a marketplace of ideas for hundreds of years, the liberals now are seeing, wow, people have got the marketplace of ideas, and now they don't want to choose it. There's a quote by Margaret Thatcher, again, love her or hate her. I don't particularly care either way about her. I'm indifferent to her as a person. She has a good quote where she says, socialists they fear people not choosing socialism, and I think the same can be said for liberals.
Yeah, they
And
do.
that's why they advocate for a marketplace of ideas to get their own opinions out there. But once their own opinions are put to scrutiny, and once people realise that the nationalist position is a lot more appealing than the liberal position, they then try and shut these organisations down, which provide that same marketplace.
Yeah, I completely agree. They want their cake and they want to eat it too. They are effectively authoritarian because they want to shut down any critique of their system and, yeah, entrench themselves. And that's why we see that the UK has more arrests for social media correspondence
Then in Russia,
than or Belarus or China. Yeah, or the supposedly
yeah,
authoritarian states.
yeah, absolutely. We claim to live in a liberal democracy, but it's neither liberal nor a democracy.
So not too much else to say in this podcast episode. I just wanted to say quickly one thing about what I did yesterday, which was I appeared on the party talk of the National Housing Party. It's a fellow Distributist party, Christian localists that we are looking to work with. They are a very solid bunch. I've got a lot of respect for their leader, Pat McGuinness. He's always out on the streets fighting his local elections, and in May, hopefully, he gets elected on a platform of opposing mass migration, stopping permanent settlement immigration. That was a pretty good crack. That was mostly, we ended up talking mostly about distributism and what it is, talking about the policies, the kind of policies that you'd see in a distributive society. I highly recommend going and catching it. In fact, I will make sure it's linked below. Sam, you said to me before we started recording that you hadn't caught it. Do you have any questions about that?
Yeah, so the National Housing Party, I mean, I've heard of them briefly. I know they've got a somewhat significant online presence.
Yes, they
My
do.
understanding is that they are quite concentrated in London, so that'd be quite
They
a good
are.
group for us to work with, considering we don't have much of a presence in London. We're kind of in the shires of England.
Yes, yes, we're mostly northwest and southwest. Working with the National Housing Party and the other two parties that we're looking to merge with, who are the Populists and the ADF, they would provide us with a very strong base in London, maybe upwards of 40 or 50 members actually. And so it would certainly be a good way to get down to the capital more often and push distributism.
And on those talks about merging, how far along are we with those with each of the respective parties? And outside of that, how are we looking at forming ourselves as a major party, or is that secondary to merging?
I would say that's primary to merging. That is the priority because we had it in the works to merge with just one party, the Populists Party, but that unfortunately fell through. But going for major party ourselves, I think, provides a lot of legitimacy, and it, I think, will push a lot of people over the edge to getting memberships when they see that we're serious about standing in larger elections. That currently is just being run by the treasurer. I believe we just have to set up a NDP bank account and clear up all the finances before we can tender fully our registration to the Electoral Commission, and then we should be a major party in time for May. As for how far along we are with all these discussions of merging, we are all drafting documents at the moment for a proposed combined policy manifesto, a combined executive list, a combined membership list, that sort of thing. We're starting to draft proposals on how we're going to achieve the creation of all those documents. Policy, we've actually started working on the combined manifesto, so to speak. Right now, it's a list of similar policies, exactly the same policies, and also differing policies. There's only a few places where we differ.
Just to be clear, sorry, which parties are these as well?
So
So it's no longer the populists.
it's no longer just the populists. It
Okay.
is the National Distributist Party, the Populist Party, the National Housing Party UK, and the Alliance for Democracy and Freedom. Four parties that
And
are all part of the Belmont Accord, which is a union of small parties, which I believe has also reached out to Restore about becoming part of their network of small parties. But yes, all four parties are part of the Belmont Accord, and we're all distributist. So we're all Christian and we're all protectionist slash localist.
and are they looking to form a super party of us four, or are they looking for all four of them knowingly about the others to all of them fold into us?
It would be the merge of a super party. Obviously, I wouldn't turn down the opportunity to join them all into the NDP, but there are many considerations: membership, who has candidates, who has sitting councillors, where the finances are, where the media exposure is, and we'll all be negotiating that at the table come May, as two of the parties involved would like to see how their candidates fare before agreeing to anything, essentially.
That makes sense.
So I
It would
think
put
yeah,
them
I
in a
think it's
stronger
fair.
position as well.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's very
exactly.
fair.
It's good leverage.
And in the meantime, we're going to kick on achieving major party status. There's a few of us in the party who looked over and drafted the party constitution and all the legal documents associated with that.
That was
And I
yourself, I
believe
believe.
yeah, yeah, and before we sign off today, I think you wanted just to briefly touch on local activism.
I did. I wanted to touch on it in relation to Restore Britain and the question you had about whether smaller parties like Great Yarmouth First are going to be the template and the first among many in a collaborative effort between lots of small, perhaps even micro parties. I think that it's really good that true nationalism is starting to get the traction it deserves. 90,000 plus members, maybe 100,000 now. I think 100,000. 10,000 of those have already signed up to be volunteers. There's plenty more volunteers probably from smaller parties who haven't signed on to Restore yet and are holding out. I think that the best thing Restore could do at the moment, before they worry about 2029 and the standing of national candidates for election, is to get straight on the ball and to do what the National Distributist Party has done, and many parties before us, I'm sure, and really engage local communities. Because nationalism, for many people, is a hard sell. It involves changing your mind from what you've been told for decades, what the media has fed you, what education has fed you, and to begin being exclusivist and to cherish your own people rather than others. And the way you're going to convince people to make that big shift in their minds is to show them that the fruits of nationalism they're very ripe and they're very good for our people. We want people to go out in their communities and start improving them before we worry about improving the country as a whole. We want people to do as we're doing in Preston, to set up food banks, to look after their green spaces, to go litter picking, and to turn their own local regions into bastions of cultural nationalism. A nationalism that isn't just political and doesn't just appear at the ballot box, but which people take home and actually live out every day. It's that urge when you see litter on the streets to pick it up and bin it yourself. Even though maybe you shouldn't, you will. Because you have fully imbibed this belief that we could all be giving a lot more to our country than we are. And if we want to make the country as nice as it was 50, 60, 70 years ago, then we have to start doing that. And we have to start taking little burdens upon ourselves to achieve it. And so I suppose the way I'm going to end this podcast is to say to people who are listening, if you have joined Restore, and even if you haven't joined Restore, sign up for their volunteer program or sign up for local volunteer programs in your area. Start to normalize spending your weekends, not the whole of the weekend, but maybe an hour or two every Saturday or Sunday, going out in your local area and improving it in little ways. Just pick litter, tidy up green spaces, volunteer with food banks, helping the homeless or helping other vulnerable people in your community, and just slowly but surely start to be the difference that you want to see people like Rupert Lowe create on the national scale. Start building it on the local scale. Now, the National Truist Party is already doing good work in Preston, and there's a lot of interest actually to start doing things in certain locations in the south, which I'm going to hop straight on as the party leader and start trying to organise new food banks, new green space groups. We have a document in progress which is meant to act as a template, so anyone can pick up this template and follow the steps within to apply to their local council for the formation of a Friends of group or a food bank group, or to apply for allotments and to get government money, actually, to get government grants upwards of 3 or 4 figures, even maybe into the 5 figures, to begin working on their local area. We're going to work on that. We're going to get that out in some point in the next few weeks as well. And basically just network, I would say. Network. Learn about who's in your local area, because once you know who's in your local area, it's much easier to do things. I mean, I hate leafleting by myself, but leafleting with someone else is really nice. Even if it's not someone who's actually leafleting with me, but is just walking with me as I leaflet, it just feels a lot more secure, and you have a lot more confidence in what you're doing when you're with fellows who agree with you. And so, yeah, the concise, the long story short of that is get out there and change your local area for the better.
Yes, absolutely. If you'd like to find out more about us, look for our Instagram page. You can find us on Substack and, of course, here on YouTube. And
On
we look
Twitter
forward to seeing you. Oh, on
as
Twitter.
well. Yeah, it'll all be in the description below, so it'll all be very easy to get a hold of. We will see you indeed, as Sam was going to say, next time, which will hopefully be much sooner than last time. And yes, the very last note is, if you were moved by my sudden impromptu speech about getting involved, the National Distributist Party is always looking for more opportunities to expand our charity efforts. So if you want a quick jump into it, get in contact with us. Thank you. you want to say goodbye, Sam? Sorry, before I cut you off.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.